Welcome everybody to my monthly shiur. I'd like to dedicate tonight's learning to Nechama Ella Bas-Leah, who's a newborn baby critical in ICU in South Africa. And please God, there'll be some merit in our learning tonight that she will have a complete and speedy recovery. Now, my topic today might seem unrelated, but as usual, you'll find that everything is connected. I'm going to be talking about appreciation and friendship and loneliness. I was thinking a lot in Rabbi Pliskin's book, Gateway to Happiness. He talks about appreciation and not gratefulness or gratitude. And I thought, what is the difference? And I've really been thinking about it. And there is definitely a difference, because I work with a lot of people who do gratitude diaries, and it's a fabulous thing, and it's become very popular, and it's become more and more part of everybody's daily life, actually. But appreciation is something that's a little bit different. It's about being sensitive to nuances. So it's about, if you think about the difference when someone says, well, I'm grateful that there's music, or someone who goes, I appreciate listening to a symphony because I hear the violins, or I hear the harp, or I hear the flute, and this one is this tone. And it's an appreciation and a sensitivity for the differences. And what I think is really magical about thinking about appreciation rather than gratitude, and you should have both, and being a Jew is being grateful. The word Yehuda, Jew, comes from the word hodu, thank you. Our essence is to be grateful. The first thing we say in the morning is thank you to Hashem for restoring our soul to us. But appreciation is a level within that. So it's not in any way distracting from gratitude. It's about when you appreciate something, it's about going a little bit deeper. And when you do, there's actually, it's an ongoing thing. So for example, if you want to say, I appreciate this person in my life, let's say it's a spouse, that's nice. You can say, I'm grateful I've got a spouse. But if you actually go appreciate this person's sensitivity or kindness or generosity, then there are always different things in appreciation we can have. Now, with appreciation, there are many sources in Chazal that tell us that man was born for pleasure. And this is an important thing also, to dispel the myth that being human is difficult and, you know, it's schwer to be a Jew. It used to be a Yiddish expression, you know, when people go, oy vey, it's hard to be a Jew, you know, it's so difficult. You've got to eat kosher and you can't put on the light on Shabbos. And it's not a good thing to say it's schwer to be a Jew. We're meant to feel it's great to be a Jew, how lucky we are. Look how many holidays we have a year. That people who work for me always go, they've never known anyone to have so many holidays. And I say they're mandated. They're compulsory. Every Jewish holiday I have to keep. How great it is to be a Jew. So we are actually born for pleasure. But unfortunately, many of us don't feel the pleasure because we haven't developed the sensitivity to appreciate. We've become habituated. And during this Corona time, it's a really good opportunity when we're not running around and doing what we normally do, to tune in to the fact that there are many daily things we can appreciate. For example, just appreciating being alive. And we often say that glibly, but really appreciating the fact we are alive. And we're going through quite a scary time, well, I've been feeling it, that we're going into the second spike and the number of corona cases worldwide, where one actually has to be grateful to be alive. But then appreciation is no more than that. It's how our bodies work. And I remember many years ago, there was a book that spoke about the functions of the body as if they were different laboratories. And the one that stuck with me the most, but they were all fantastic, was about the liver. So the liver actually filters toxins. And in this book, they spoke about what kind of a factory you'd have to build to eliminate the toxins that the liver eliminates. So when we eat food that has got synthetic stuff or toxic stuff or harmful stuff, the liver actually filters it out. And I'm not putting it very well, but it's an incredible machine. And each of our organs is an incredible machine. Each one has a specific task. each one secretes just the right amount of hormones that we need to do, whether it is to break down sugars or elevate cortisol. It's an unbelievable thing, and that's what appreciation is. It's not, I'm grateful to be alive. Good, that's fantastic. It's not, I'm grateful to be healthy. Also fantastic. But if you actually took a minute to appreciate the fact my heart just keeps beating the way it does without me thinking about it, that's incredible. And if you actually learn about the heart and how it works, that's incredible. So there's no end to the appreciation we could feel on how our body is working. So I thought I would do a very short variation of something that I learned this week. So I've been doing a course on acceptance and commitment therapy, and he did a mindfulness exercise, which is called mindfulness of the hand. And the one I did with him took 5 minutes, but I'm going to do a 1 minute one. So I'm going to ask you all to focus on your hand. Now remember, mindfulness is not relaxation. It's just really, really focusing on purpose to what I'm going to be talking about. So I'd like you just to look at your hand. And what I'd like you to do is to just notice your fingerprint. Notice how each of the tips of your finger has a fingerprint. And then notice how the lines continue down your finger. And then notice in the palm of your hand, you've got deeper lines, and then you've got lots of fine lines. And I want you to stretch your fingers out, and then I want you to turn your hand sideways. And I want you to notice that running along the top of your index finger is actually a line. And that line separates the front of the finger from the back of the finger. And now I want you to turn your hand over, and I want you to make a fist and watch your knuckles come up. And then I want you to put your hand straight and watch how the knuckles disappear. And this time I want you to make a fist and watch the tendons that link all your muscles in your arm to your fingers, and then open your hand and watch the tendons. And then I want you just to take a few seconds to look at the skin on top of your hands. Just notice what the thin skin on top looks like. Now, one can literally do it. The one I did, there's so much in your hand that you can spend, and I might actually post it when I find his recording. It's fascinating how you can spend 5 to 8 minutes looking at your hand. Now, the mindfulness exercise is great. However, from a Jewish point of view, we want to have appreciation. In fact, we want to have a sense of wonder that on your hand, this is what I didn't know, and I've done anatomy many, many years ago, decades ago, that there's a line along the top. That's an incredible thing. And then if you think about your knuckles and how they disappear, that's an incredible thing. And then looking at the top of my hands, you realize, looking a bit like my mother's old hand, that's an incredible thing, the genetics, how it goes down, and so on. So every part of our body, that was just 1 minute with your hand, is something that spend a bit of time every day to really appreciate how you don't have to understand the function, but how things work, the complexity and the pleasure you'll get to realize what an amazing body you have. And again, that brings you to appreciate Hashem and Hashem's incredible creations. The other main way, but it's all different things, that one obviously gets pleasure in the world, is to look at nature and to be incredulous at the beauty of nature, the different colors, the different textures, how you have a little seed that looks like nothing and you put it in the ground and it becomes a massive oak tree. And another seed that looks exactly the same and you put it in the ground and it becomes a little pansy. All these are incredible things, and to appreciate the work that went into creating the world, so to speak, and how we're surrounded with such amazing and beautiful things. The other big thing we can look at is technology. To appreciate all the inventions that we can now use, whether it's dishwashers, washing machines, all the technology. I've heard a few rabbis talk about how we talk about the refuah comes before the klola, that the fact that we have technology and Skype and Zoom was already there for when coronavirus happened. We had the technology to stay connected. So any new thing that you have, anything that makes your life easier, again, be grateful for it. but just spend a minute to actually think about, is it incredible? I did this the other day. I thought, why Skype and not Zoom? And then Zoom has breakout rooms, and it's quite incredible. And who are these people that think about these things, and who are these inventors? And then this idea that the whole world was created for me means that the fact that this person invented Zoom, and I can do this here tonight, was all for me and for all of you. Now, there might be other reasons as well, but we need to believe that this precise moment, Zoom was created for us. And that's a sense of wonder. So really, if you do have a sense it's hard to be alive and it's hard to be a Jew and everything's tough, you want to shift that away to actually go, how wonderful and privileged we are to be Jewish, how wonderful and privileged we are to be alive, and all the amazing things that we can appreciate. The reason that we stop appreciating is called habituation. We get used to everyday things. We get used to the sun coming up and going down. So go and watch a sunset. Remind yourself of the colors and the beauty and what happens when the sun rises or sets. We take it for granted. We take our hands for granted. And the idea is to get into a habit to really appreciate the depth and complexity. And of course, Torah has an inbuilt way to help us, and that is by saying blessings. So every morning we say blessings. It's an opportunity to say thank you for giving me eyesight. Thank you for giving me the strength to get through the day. Brachas are a wonderful way to, when we eat an apple, thank you for this beautiful, delicious fruit. But even then, it's about being mindful. When you eat, focus on your eating, and afterwards, if you don't want to bench formally, just say thank you for this food. How lucky I am that I've got food on my table. But then the appreciation is, and how tasty this apple was, or how nourishing this food is, or how good for my digestive system, how everything is so amazing in the world. You want to have a sense of wonder. And think about children. You know, when you go out with kids, they have that sense of wonder. Everything's new and everything's interested. And in acceptance and commitment therapy, they talk about that. Walk around like a curious scientist, an openness to experience, an expansiveness to discovering new things. That is a very beautiful way to be in the world and to really have a different quality of life, whatever it is. We don't have to wait until we get that before we feel happy. And we don't have to believe it's only if we retire or go on amazing holidays or then we're going to enjoy life. We can enjoy life today, appreciating what we have. We don't have to look at what we don't have because we all lack things. But the more we focus on what we do have, the more we can actually enjoy every single day. And so practice mindfulness in various ways, just to be aware, but with a sense of wonder. Isn't it incredible that this is happening for me right now? Isn't it incredible my body can do this? Now, I've been wanting to talk about friendship for a while, and one of the reasons is because it's such an important thing, and socializing and interacting has become a big part of treating mental health issues, which I'll explain in a minute. But when I was reading through Rabbi Pliskin's things on acceptance, the last point is that you cannot have pleasure in the world in the same way when you're on your own than when you're with a friend. And so the idea of sharing with people is a very intrinsic part of enjoying life. And that's why often when you go to a wedding, they'll have on the benches, you know, thank you for sharing our simcha. It couldn't have been the same without you. And it's true. Often it's great to have things on our own, but one of the things we're all lacking now or feeling is we're not able to share things in the same way. So this, you know, it's very, very tragic that we can't share when people, God forbid, are dying. But we have the other side now. It's very difficult when people are having babies. You can't go to them in hospital. You can't see them. You know, it's a very different experience. And he talked about some Chazal who was saying that, you know, if you watch the sunset with someone, it brings a whole added dimension if you can have that opportunity. And I thought that's why actually when people are tourists, they take so many photos. And that's why selfies are actually good, because you're by yourself, but you're taking a recording that hopefully you're going to share with somebody else. And it reminded me of the old days, and some of you will remember that there were people who used to take slides, like they would go to Switzerland and take slides of their trip. Let's say they'd go on their own, and they would go on a trip, and then when they would come back, they'd have an evening where we would sit around with that slide projector and watch slides, often for a few interminable hours, but that's what good friends do. We sit and we watch. But where was it coming from? The desire to share the experience with others. So you were there, let's say in this case, he was there, he saw this beautiful mountain in Grindelwald, but coming back and having his friends go, wow, that's amazing, how beautiful, adds a whole different dimension. So from a Torah point of view, friendships are very, very important. And in fact, there's a famous expression that was made by Choni HaMagil, if not friendship, then death. Now, Choni HaMagil was a very learned man, and he wrote various things. He was a very wise man, and he had certain teachings. And one day he was walking along, and he saw somebody planting a carob tree. And he said to the guy, what are you planting? The guy said, a carob tree. And he said, doesn't a carob tree take 70 years to produce fruit? And this man said, yes. So Choni said, so why are you doing it? So this man said, for my grandchildren. So Choni was a bit like skeptical. And what Hashem did was he put him into a very, very deep sleep. Now, many of you might know the story of Rip van Winkle. Well, this is where it comes from. By the way, all these stories have a source in Torah. Choni HaMagil was put to sleep for 70 years. He was in a deep, deep sleep. And after 70 years, he woke up. This is in the Gemara. And there was this magnificent carob tree full of fruit. He didn't realize 70 years had passed. He got up and he walked to the Beis HaMidrash where he was used to being. And he walked and he actually heard people studying his works. And he came and he said, hello, I'm Choni HaMagil. And they cracked up laughing and they said, don't be ridiculous. He died years ago. And he tried to tell them, no, this is really who I am. I've been sleeping. And no one would believe him. And even his family, his grandkids wouldn't accept that that's who he was. And he made this famous comment, if not friendship, then death. Now, what did he mean by that? What he meant, and we've all had this experience, and certainly I can talk as a new immigrant to a country, when you arrive somewhere and people don't know who you are and they don't know who your essence is and they don't know where you come from, it's a very alienating experience. And that's why when you meet an old childhood friend, that feeling of connection, because they know who you are, they know things about you you don't have to tell. That is what a friend gives you. They reflect a part of you that makes you feel whole. But when you're in a new country or in a new place and you're not understood or you're not known who you are, it's very, very alienating. So friends are very important for us feeling whole. They're also very important for us to be able to share with. The Torah is very big on saying, share your worries with other people. Now, we're not talking about Lashon Hara, but we talk about when you're able to unburden yourself to somebody else, it will help you. In fact, Rabbi Gorari spoke about this maybe on Friday or Thursday in his personal growth. The reason is that we're really all connected, and so you have a double amount of neshama, if you like, to cope with the problem. So it's not a Jewish way not to share. It is important in a healthy, non-attacking other people way to be able to share your burdens. That's a massive thing. And Pirkei Avos says, find yourself a teacher, and the Hebrew word is buy yourself a friend. And a lot of people don't like that expression. What does it mean to buy a friend? It doesn't mean that you have to bribe somebody, but what it means is you need to invest in order to have a friend. It takes work. You need to do the work to acquire a friend. Don't think you can sit back and demand in your mind or in your actions that people contact you and invite you over and do all the right things. if you want a friend, you have to be a friend. You need to put in the time and effort. And if they're a good friend, sometimes you might feel that you're putting in more effort. But what this Pierre Calvos is suggesting is it's worth it. If someone is worth it, do it. So the way I explain it is this. Let's say, for example, and I'm thinking of a particular person in my life, she's a Revertson, she's incredibly busy, but I really value her friendship. So maybe I call her more often because she doesn't have much time. But the friendship is so valuable that it's not tit for tat. I get enough out of it that it's worth my while maybe to phone more often. That's what it means. But it also means that, as I say, you invest time. Friendships won't happen without time. And friendships won't happen if you're mean to people. You've got to work on being friendly. You've got to work on being kind. You've got to work on being empathic. Very core part of having good relationships is understanding that other people will have a different point of view. And this the Torah says as well. It's good for you to be friendly with someone who doesn't always have the same point of view, because it expands your mind. Otherwise, you stay very limited. You stay very focused on your way of seeing things. And Torah is about growth. Torah is about learning new things. As I said earlier, it's about being a curious scientist. It's about really having wonder about the world. So you might believe something. And again, we're not talking about halachic things. But gee, you've got a friend who says, you know what, you don't have to, I don't know, go to a 5-star hotel. Let's try camping. And you go camping and you have a great time. And you go, wow, if I didn't have that friend, I wouldn't have been stretched in that way. So friendships, again, bring out different parts. And we need to understand that our friends will be different to us. And we need to be able, I'm not even going to say tolerate, to really enjoy the differences. And to realize that unless someone is doing something that's immoral, that's anti-halacha, it's just a difference in opinion and taste. So you might cater in this way. You might have a 4-course meal. They have a 1-course meal. Don't get caught up in, they're not like me and I would have done it like this. We're different. There's no moral issue. This person brings value into my life. I hope I bring value into their life. But friendships are really important that you put work into them. Now, what happens when you don't have friends, or what happens when, which a lot of us are going through now, when people are alone? So loneliness is something that has been reported on in the psychology world for a while now. I think a few months ago, before Corona, the Psychology Journal had a whole article on stats of loneliness in Australia. The Time magazine this week had a whole article on stats on loneliness in America. And what they talk about is that there's always been loneliness and it's on the increase. I think they give a number of over 36 million people in America on their own. But of course, with coronavirus, it's just escalated. Now, loneliness has nothing to do with being alone. So loneliness, people can be, they have one woman who's married with 3 kids and is frenzied with the kids, but feels exceptionally alone. And you can have other people who live on their own, but don't feel alone. So it's a subjective feeling that people score. And it's going up and up and up. And in this Time magazine, they said 60% of Americans feel lonely. It's a huge percentage. Now, why this is very important is because although loneliness is not in the DSM-5, it's not in the category of mental health, it is found to be comorbid with so many different conditions. So loneliness very much is part of depression. Loneliness is part of anxiety. It's part of self-harm. It's a contributing factor to physical distress. And even now they're seeing in terms of inflammation. So although it hasn't got its own category, it definitely is inflammatory. It definitely exacerbates whatever condition you have. And in fact, if you've had a severe illness, if you're lonely, you have a better chance of recovering. So we know that we have a social brain, and when we have a support group, we will have better mental and physical health. Physical and mental health. So it's very important that we stay connected. It's not sort of just a nice thing. It's very, very important. And today when we treat mental health, it's one of the things, just like we talk about it's important to exercise, it's important to meditate, it's important to eat well. It's also important to stay connected. It's not just, as I say, by the way, we know when people stay connected, their physical and mental health is much better. So starting with ourselves, if you have found, and I've had a few people tell me, oh, I'm enjoying being in my cocoon, I'm not speaking to people very often. Don't let it get to a point where you feel lonely and disconnected. Put in the work to stay connected. And technology does help with that. It's not perfect, but at least we've got that. Phone calls are still good. But there are other ways that you can hope to stay connected, whether it's meeting in a park and physically distancing. That's why we're saying don't use the word social distancing. We want to talk about physical distancing. Now, the thing is, what about other people? In this article in Time, they're talking about, I don't know if it's the federal or whichever government, needing to put things in place. And I myself have been to some New South Wales parliamentary discussions where they're talking about how to help people who are disconnected. So one of the things that they're doing in Sydney is they have these communal gardens. There's one very near where I live in Anglesey Street. And the idea is that a few times, people can go anytime, but a few times a month, people go and they do it in different buildings. We each need to take a responsibility. Don't rely on the government. But I'm really appealing to everybody to think about people who may be disconnected. And it's often the people we don't like. And they're often the people that it's difficult to be with. But we all have a mutual responsibility. We are one people to call people and stay connected. I saw on TV the other night, they had children at some school writing to aged people that they didn't know. And I remember the old pen pal days. That's what we should be doing. Write to old people, send packages. Because if you were ever at camp or you ever got a package, you know that feeling. It doesn't have to always be a conversation, but there's a connectedness that someone actually knows I exist. There's some amazing stories about the Rebbe. There's so many of them, but I don't know the exact one, but a Jew in the middle of Norway who's been disconnected from Judaism, and one day thinks, if there was a Moses of our generation, he'd know about me, and then suddenly a box of matzah arrives in the post, or Chabad Shaliach arrives. This feeling of, my gosh, somebody cares, somebody knows I exist, is very, very important. And remember, whatever we do for each other, actually, it's like I mentioned last time, if we drill a hole in a boat, we all go down. If we all protect the boat, we all stay afloat. So even if you do it for self-interest, you're allowed to use your Yetzer Hara in these conditions. Very, very important to stay connected to other people and to value your friendships. Now, having said that, there is a concept called the lonely man of faith. Now, Rav Soloveitchik wrote a very fascinating book, The Lonely Man of Faith. And 2 weeks ago, Rabbi Sachs spoke about it. And I thought I would mention it because Rabbi Sachs's whole take on it was, we are in coronavirus, and many of us might be feeling so desperate and so alone or so lonely. And then often we feel guilty about that, especially if we're surrounded by people. Often people think, they say to me, I don't have a right, or it's a first world problem. But you may actually be feeling lonely. And what he spoke about, which I just want to read some of it and share with you because we actually need the Acts quote, is he says, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, actually nearly had a breakdown. He uses the word breakdown. And he says, when people started complaining, the Jewish people started complaining to a point, he said to Hashem, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you that you put the burden of all these people on me? I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, please go ahead and kill me. If I found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. Now, one of the reasons Rabbi Sachs has mentioned it is because One of the beautiful things about Tanakh is we don't hide the struggles of our leaders. We don't pretend that they were perfect. Here is Moses himself saying, I feel I can't go on. I feel my life is not worth living. What Hashem does in this case is he tells him to appoint 70 elders to share the burden of leadership. So again, you don't have to be alone. You're going to have some community. But the thing was that Moshe had a crisis of faith, which I'm going to go into in a minute. Now, it wasn't only him. David HaMelech had the same. In one of his Psalms, 130, he says, I'm worn out from my groaning. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And Rav Soloveitchik in his book says the same thing. I'm lonely because at times I feel rejected and thrust away by everybody, not excluding my most intimate friends and the worms of the psalmists. So these are just three examples. There's Eliyahu, there's Jeremiah, there's Yonah. They all are explicitly spoken about in Tanakh. They were human, not superhuman. And we can understand their psychological cries. But the reason that Tanakh, according to Rabbi Sachs, is so that we don't feel lonely in our loneliness, that we don't have the added self-talk that I'm bad or I'm wrong. There will be times where we are going to feel very, very lonely. And what Rabbi Sachs says is that what came out of it for all of them is a much, much deeper connection to Hashem. That in that loneliness, you realize that it's only you and Hashem, and only Hashem can help you through it. So it's a bit like this analogy. Let's say a mother takes a newborn baby, or let's say not so newborn, a baby for a vaccination. It's very painful. That needle goes in, the baby screams, but the baby clings tighter to the mother. The same mother that takes the child for the vaccination gives comfort to the baby. The same Hashem that is giving us our test, we have to cling tighter to. That's how it works. So what happened to all of these people didn't mean Hashem always made their lives easier. With David HaMelech, he definitely didn't. But in that aloneness, in that crying out to Hashem, you have a much, much deeper connection. Now, I have also an added take on that. Often I have found that when people are going through a hard time, they get angry with people around them. They feel the people around them are not supporting them enough. So very often it's a spouse. I'm going through this hard time and you're not making me feel better. Could be parents, could be siblings, could be friends. We get very, very angry because I'm feeling lonely. I'm going through this crisis of faith and you are not helping me. The truth is, my belief is, that when we go through a crisis of faith, it's just you alone with God. Nobody can actually help you. It's a depth of despair and working through that nobody can actually go through with us. So if you think about it, if you've gone through a tragedy, it's a normal tragedy, you lose a parent in a normal way, no one really can take away that grief. People can be supportive and be meals, but there's a certain experience that's yours and yours alone. And so we need to have realistic expectations of our friends. They can be there for us and we can be there for them, but we also need to take some responsibility in a good way for what we're going through. As Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, who will be there for me? We need to know that sometimes we're going to go through things that are very, very tough. And as connected as we are, it's there to bring us closer to Hashem. So whatever we're going through with coronavirus, we can turn it into a positive in the sense of going, let me use this as a way of actually getting closer to Hashem. I want to tell you a nice Shlomo, on a lighter note, Shlomo Carlebach's story about friendship. So he tells a story about Moshe. Moshe goes once a year on Rosh Hashanah to see his Rebbe, who is the seer of Lublin. And he arrives a day early, and as he's walking to see his Rebbe screams at him and says, Moshe, go home immediately. And he says, but Rebbe, I've come to see you. Go home as soon as you can. I haven't got time to see you. So Moshe is devastated. What can he do? He has to listen to his Rebbe. He starts going home, and he's got to spend the night at the inn. And at this inn are all these other Hasidim on the way to the Seir of Lublin. And they see that he's very, very upset. And they say, what's wrong? And he tells them, he says, I was rejected, I was kicked out, I came all the way, and now I have it at my annual thing. So one of the Hasidim lifts up his glass of beer, and he says, L'chaim, Moshe, you should have a great year for Rosh Hashanah. And then they all start, L'chaim, L'chaim, and they start giving him brachas. He should have a happy year and a long life, and he should be forgiven, L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. Anyway, they all go to sleep, and in the morning, they say to Moshe, you know what, come with us. He says, I don't know, the seer told me not to come. And they said, come. So he goes with them, and this time, when the Chozeh of Lublin sees him, he puts out his arms, he says, Moshe, I'm so glad you came. And Moshe says, what? What do you mean? What happened last time? And so he said, let me explain to you. When you came to see me last time, I saw that the angel of death was accompanying you. And I was worried that you would die here and not say goodbye to your family. And so I wanted you to go home quickly and be with your family. He said, tell me what's happened since I last saw you. So Moshe told him, he said, all your friends saying, L'chaim, L'chaim, they sent away the angel of death. And Moshe, with friends like yours, you're going to live forever. So this is the beauty of friendship. And we should always be praying for each other and wishing each other well. You never have an idea of what you're actually doing for somebody with a simple L'chaim. I was thinking about, these are interesting concepts, but I always like to look at it in a bigger picture. And again, I was reading Jonathan Sacks this week, and he was talking about, so for those of you who read, you know, he was talking about what's really going on, is what he called it. And it was really fascinating because he gave some examples of some books. One is by a woman, Amy Chu. I haven't read it, about political tribes, but his point was that her book looked at all the bad mistakes that the American government or military have done, all their failures. And she says the reason there were these failures is because they didn't see the whole picture. And he said that relates very much to the parasha we've just had. What went wrong with what we call the spies? Why was there such a terrible situation? 12 leaders went. They were all leaders. They were all charismatic. They all had faith. They were not men who didn't have faith. 10 of them came back and went, oh, we're never going to make it. The land is going to eat us up. And 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, came back and said, it's a beautiful land and we should go. And Rabbi Sacks looks at the word for, and I haven't got it on me, but where they went. He said the word actually was not spies. The word is actually tourists. They were meant to go as tourists and not as spies. A spy goes to look at the war. How are we going to cope? Where are the defenses? Are we going to be able to win? To look for the flaws, to look for the difficulties. And they came back and said, we can't. There are giants there. But what does a tourist do? A tourist goes with good eyes. A tourist goes and only sees the good in a place. You know, it's like that old story about a Jew who has a dream. And this Jew dreams that he's going to finally go to Israel. Very old joke. So in his dream, he arrives in Israel and it's great. He was obviously a secular Jew because when his vision of coming was he went to Tel Aviv and there were bars and hotels and the beach. Israel looked amazing. And he woke up in the morning and he thought, you know what? I think I'm really going to go. That dream really convinced me Israel's the place for me. So he goes on Aliyah. And when he arrives there, it's hard, especially in those years, let's say in the 70s, it was really tough. We used to talk about the new immigrants, it was backbreaking. So he gets very, very upset. And he goes and he speaks to a rabbi and he says, you know what, I had this dream. And he said, and it looked like amazing. And now I've come and it's actually hell. And the rabbi said, yep. Because in your dream, you came as a tourist. This time you've come as a new immigrant. Anyway, this idea of it was they were meant to go as tourists and see the good. They were meant to come and only see how beautiful it was so that they would fall in love with the place and then go and make it work. And he gives an analogy. It's the same as when a couple, let's say in the Shidduch system, they have to meet at least once so that they approve of each other and they like each other and then they're happy to move ahead. That was really the purpose of it. So the reason that I'm saying this to you is it's important for us to see the big picture. All the things we're talking about are practical ways that we can improve our day-to-day life. But at the end of the day, we mustn't lose sight of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, as Rabbi Jacobson said last week, for those of you who watched Sinai Down Under, what is our narrative? What Rabbi Jacobson was talking about was, they were talking about the looting and the riots in America, and he said an interesting thing. He was saying that different cultures have different narratives that they live up to. So he didn't mention this, but I prefer to mention the Palestinians. It's a well-known thing that the Palestinians are the longest set of refugees ever. Like, they've been refugees for 70 years. That's their narrative. We are refugees. There were thousands of Jews who were kicked out of all kinds of countries. They move elsewhere. They don't carry the narrative that they're refugees. What is our narrative? And our narrative is that we are actually part of a bigger picture and we are moving towards Mashiach. Now, I wanted to read with you some of the things that I thought were really interesting about how people have tried to cope with difficulties in life and how they've tried to cope with this idea of struggling with their faith. Because let's face it, as these three rebellions I'm going to talk about, there are times we all feel rebellious. We're sick and tired of what's going on. What we're doing is not working. Let's do something different. So Rabbi Jacobson talks about, after the incident of the spies, there were three revolts. One revolt was one person went out on Shabbos and started chopping wood on Shabbos. They broke Shabbos. The second group were people who, straight after Moshe told everyone we're not going into Israel now for 40 years, they said we're going anyway. We don't need you, Moshe, we're going to go anyway. And the third group later on was Korach, who said to Moshe, who says you're so special? We're all holy. Now what Rabbi Jacobson says is that each of those revolts actually symbolize three types of Jews that we have today. The first of those Jews who gave up Torah, they actually said, you know what, it's fair to be a Yid. It's too hard to be Jewish. It's hard not to work on Shabbos. We're giving up Shabbos. We're going to become secular. We're going to assimilate. And that's the way we're going to save ourselves. And as we know, like in France for 100 years, they said that the best way to be Jewish was to be French. They were totally liberated, and then they had the Dreyfus case and then Nazi Germany. But there was a time, if we're secular, no one will bother us, our life will be better. The second group, the group that said we're going without Moshe, that symbolizes Zionism. Those are the people that said, you know what, we don't have to be religious. We can be a nationalist state. We can just be nationalistic. We're going to be Zionistic. And the third group are the group that, just like Korach said, Moshe, you're not so special. We don't have to stick to what you say, are people that have developed all kinds of different reform, conservative, neoconservative, messianic, all these different ideas. And these are all different ways that people have tried to find a solution. So I want to read to you what Rabbi Jacobson is quoting from the Rebbe. He said the Rebbe turned to all these three groups and he declared, you and we deserve much, much better than what you are opting for. We are all annoyed and frustrated with our long, arduous, tortuous, and bitter goddess. But don't sell yourself cheap. Don't settle on a superficial Messiah. The great test of our generation was our temptation to settle for all forms of false messiahs in order to numb our pain. We are not thinking big enough, the Rebbe said. The fact that Jews can live in their ancient homeland is an awesome miracle. The fact that Jews can and must protect themselves unapologetically is our sacred duty. The fact that we've integrated and reached success in every facet of secular life is a blessing. But listen to this. Yet we have not endured 2,000 years of suffering just to be able to drink coffee in Dizengoff or eat falafel in Ben Yehuda. We have not endured millennia of blood and tears just to reach the highest echelons in Hollywood, Wall Street, and Washington. We have not endured Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Dachau just to raise a flag and have our own air force, like 191 other countries. We have not sacrificed for millennia just to be able to feel accepted by CNN and the New York Times. Is the sum total of our entire blood-drenched history that the UN stops condemning us for wanting us to breathe? And the Rebbe says this: we are looking for something so gigantic, so unprecedented, so mind-boggling, that will be able to justify all we have been through. A type of redemption that will allow us to finally say, now I get it. And until we reach that point, let us not delude ourselves that we have achieved our real success. Let us not settle for poker chips. We want the best and the brightest during the last days of exile. But what we need to fight for is the ultimate revolution, when the entire purpose of creation will be fulfilled, when divine infinity will fill our entire consciousness and the innate harmony of all existence come to the fore. Now, I thought this was very powerful because, as I say, it's very good that we focus on doing the right thing, that we focus on enjoying our lives, even if it's difficult. So practicing appreciation will help us. Building friendships is essential. Connecting to other people, we must do it. We must think of other people every single day, and that'll help our own loneliness as well. But we shouldn't forget the big picture, that we have a narrative, we're on a journey, and everything we do brings us closer to that. But it also will inspire us with incredible hope of what we're going to have. Now, Natan Sharansky, he's actually put up a very short video about, he was in isolation for a few years. He was in prison in Russia for at least 9 years. You can see it on YouTube. I watched it. I was a little bit disappointed because, terrible what I'm saying. He looks great and he kept joking and he was so strong. So I suppose I was looking for more about what I went through, and he didn't. And so good on him where he is now. But what I got out of that was just look at him years later, how he's recovered, how he has experienced post-traumatic growth. And he did it because he was a secular Jew when he went into prison. He actually says until 1967, he did not identify as a Jew, but he was identified. People said to him, wow, look what Israel did. And they connected him. If you're Jewish, Israel. And so he started to think about, I'm part of a much bigger community. And he said it was mind-boggling. He'd never thought about it, but that completely changed his life. So when he was in prison fighting to go to Israel, he said he had a dream, he had a vision of going to Israel, of being part of a bigger nation. He was actually the reason that Shlomo Carlebach made the song Am Yisrael Chai. So when Shlomo Carlebach went to Russia, he had to write what songs he was going to sing, and he actually called it Od Avinu Chai. I actually heard it from him personally, because if he'd said Am Yisrael Chai, they wouldn't have allowed it, my people are alive. So he said, my fathers are alive. And he went to this hall with, in those days it was dangerous for Jews to go to Russia. You couldn't be openly Jewish, but he started singing, yes, my Od Avinu Chai, and then it turned into Am Yisrael Chai, and it just was the most incredible outpouring. And Natan Sharansky says the realization that he was part of a community, he said, got him through years of prison, that he did not feel alone, that he knew that there were people trying to get him out. And this is what I'm saying about friendship. It's not just on an individual level. We are here for each other. We are part of a much bigger picture. And that can help us feel less lonely, but it can also give us a purpose. And he was saying we can all have meaning knowing that we're part of a much, much bigger purpose, that something unique and amazing is happening. And we shouldn't settle for second best. as Rabbi Jacobson said, when David HaMelech was saying his Tehillim and he was wretched, he asked for kingship. He didn't ask just for a little hut. We've got to ask for what we want. We have to be aware that what we're going through is important, but we also have to keep our eye on the big picture, which will help us, but will also help everybody around us. So I'm going to end with one of my favorite stories. And this is a story about in the times of Russia, there was always the cruel poritz or the cruel landlord. And if Jews couldn't pay their rent, this particular wealthy poritz used to throw them into this basement. And they were just left there to languish. It was actually a cave, this particular basement. And all he did was once a week, there was a hole in the ground, he would put a bucket of food down. And this went on for a whole generation. Those Jews were forgotten about, and every week this food came down. Well, what happened was that the Jews, kind of being Jews, and their narrative isn't that we're going to be refugees or hard done by, they started building a life. They realized we need a mikveh, we've got to have marriages, they started having babies, they had a little marketplace. They started thriving in this community, and they completely forgot that there was a whole world out there. I mean, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't anything. The new generation came, and they had this thriving community in these caves. Well, what happened was, a generation went by. There was this particular poritz had a very kind son who left them alone. Nobody new came in. And one day, the grandson, who was as evil as the grandfather, found a Jew who didn't pay rent, threw him into the caves. So they all find this new person and they go, wow, who are you? And he tells them, and they say, where have you come from? And he says, I've come from the real world. They go, don't be ridiculous. This is the world. He goes, no, you don't understand. He said, this is a cave. There's a world out there. And he starts telling them, where I come from, there are beautiful mountains, there's green grass, there's magnificent trees, there are colorful flowers, there are rivers that flow, there are animals, there's farms. He goes through everything and they're all laughing and cracking up like this guy's insane. He said, don't be ridiculous. This is the real world. There's something wrong with you. There's nothing else. Now that's what happens to us. Very often we think this is the whole world. Whatever we're going through, this is it. And when we have a bleak period, really hard, and then we have a little bit of a better, but we're settling. We're settling for not so good. We're settling for, as the Rebbe says, poker chips. Now we have to remember that there's a whole new world. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be a whole new lifetime. That we are just in here temporarily, and there is something much, much bigger that we're working towards. So it's very important that we do our mitzvahs in a practical, organized way, all the things we're talking about today, but not to forget what our narrative is, and not to forget what our ultimate purpose is, and to use the loneliness that we might be experiencing to forge a deeper connection with Hashem, to use it as a time to really develop as human beings, as Jews, to prepare ourselves, but also that ultimately to make the world a better place.